first season was Louisiana and hot and steamy and lots of bright light. Ours is the opposite, so cold Alaska. Particularly female story told by an indigenous woman.
I must ask you this from the very beginning. What could cause a woman, once admired by all of Hollywood, to choose absolute silence? What could make a two-time Oscar-winning star avoid, sidestep, and sever ties without hesitation with 6 men who once stood beside her on the same stage? And most importantly, who did what to make Jodie Foster, someone who has always believed that ethics are an extension of art, turn her back without any warning? I once thought that list was just a rumor, a fabrication by tabloids. But I was wrong. It's real, not in leaked emails, not written on paper, but clearly present in her eyes, in the purposeful avoidance, in each refusal to collaborate, never needing an explanation. 6 names, 6 men, 6 cracks that Foster doesn't want to bring up, but will never forget. I followed the traces, and with each step, a reason became clearer. I can't speak for Foster, but I can guide you through each slice of that list, so you can see the truth for yourself.
Again, I was terrified. But it's a little bit of like, here, you can have this dog food or you can starve.
Right after everything I've just mentioned, the blacklist, the avoiding glances, and the prolonged silence, I knew there was no one more deserving of being at the start of this story than this name, Mel Gibson. That I once thought that, at least with veteran actors, there would be mutual respect. But then I heard the story directly from Foster, and I realized how naive I had been. It was a script meeting. No warning. No preparation. Gibson walked in as if the set was his personal comedy stage. He glanced at the thick notebook in Foster's hand and smirked, saying, "Do you need to write a thesis to understand your character? I just need to live it." The entire room laughed. But Foster didn't. She stayed silent, closed her notebook, and stood up, without a word. I ask you, was that remark funny, or was it insulting? Is someone who spends months studying the psychology of a character, just to understand every glance, deserving of being trampled on because someone else is too lazy to do the work? Foster later quietly shared in a private interview, "I didn't leave because I was offended. I left because he insulted the craft I love." Another time, while she was having a serious discussion with the director about the emotional context of an important scene, Gibson interrupted, raised his hand, and pretended to fall asleep. In a room full of people, right in front of the entire crew. That wasn't just impolite. That was an outright humiliation. Does that seem familiar to you? Arrogance disguised as talent. Superficiality demanding respect. Laziness that dismisses the efforts of others. Would you accept working with someone like that? If it were you, would you stand up and protest? Or would you quietly walk away, just like Foster did? Comment below and let me know what you think. From that moment on, Foster never spoke Gibson's name again. And every script with his name on it was immediately crossed off. And no need for public statements. No need for revenge. Just one departure, and that was enough to make him the first name erased from her artistic world. If Mel Gibson was the one who publicly insulted her honor, then Anthony Hopkins was the one who coldly suffocated her emotions, with a cruelty that was detached and relentless. The Silence of the Lambs, the timeless film that terrified the world, was also the place where Jodie Foster and Hopkins never exchanged a single word. 6 months. No eye contact. No smiles. No handshakes. Only silence. A silence far more frightening than Hannibal Lecter himself. Hopkins entered the set as if everything there was beneath him. His face was emotionless, his gaze distant, and his voice, as if preaching to an audience unworthy of him. He wasn't acting, he was lecturing. Every line Hopkins uttered was full of arrogance, coldness, and a lack of emotion, like a machine from a bygone era. As for Foster, she gritted her teeth and endured. Not out of fear, but out of disdain. She couldn't understand why someone who only showcased outward appearances was considered a master of acting, while she, who spent months learning from the FBI, conversing with criminals, and analyzing every character's psychology, was treated like an obsessive oddball. To me, he's not a co-star. He's an obstacle, Foster bluntly said in an interview that was cut from the official release. There was a layer of ice between us, and it never thawed, Foster said. One time after a shocking scene, she suggested reshooting to capture a better emotional response. Hopkins replied, "You act as though you're no longer yourself. And that terrifies me." Was it fear? Or simply an inability to understand Foster's dedication to her craft? What would you think if you had to play a twin soul alongside someone who never even touches your hand? Could a masterpiece be born from two hearts that never sink? If it were you, would you give in, or continue living true to your own emotions? In Hollywood, there are those who don't need to scream to create wounds. They only need to say nothing. Comment below if you've ever felt alone in the work you're passionate about, just like Foster, and if you think things have gotten intense so far, wait for the next part. Because it's not just about the differences, it's the collision of two entirely opposing worlds of art. Richard Gere, a name that makes millions of hearts flutter. But for Jodie Foster, he represents the symbol of superficiality adorned with a fake glow, and a nightmare for anyone who truly values the depth of acting. They have never shared a frame together. Not because there was a lack of opportunities, but because every time there was a chance, Foster flatly refused, as if just hearing his name was enough to make her uncomfortable. Why? He loves beauty. I love truth. And between those two, there is an abyss. Foster once said in a leaked meeting. In a 1991 casting session, Foster arrived 45 minutes early, bringing with her a thick stack of materials analyzing the character's behavior, proposing psychological depth, and suggesting dialogue revisions. Gere arrived 20 minutes late, carrying nothing but a fashionable coat and his famous smile. Foster opened the conversation. "What do you think your character loves and why?" Gere replied, "It doesn't matter. As long as I look like I'm in love, the audience will believe it." The room fell into a deathly silence. Foster packed up her things, stood up, and walked out. Cold, like a slap in the face to all those who mock art. Another handsome guy turning effort into a joke. How many more times must we witness superficiality being hailed as genius? Foster didn't choose to react loudly. She chose to eliminate it at its root. From then on, every invitation with Gere's name was immediately rejected without even being read. For her, art is not a stage for those who arrive late and utter a few empty lines. It's a battle, and lazy people, no matter how beautiful they are, have no place on it. Kevin Costner, a name that once shone brightly on screen, a hero in the hearts of generations. But for Jodie Foster, he was nothing more than a dim veil, a self-satisfied facade hiding a shallow soul. The image of the hero was merely a fragile disguise he built to cover his lack of depth. In a dramatic project meeting, Foster entered like a warrior, armed with knowledge, skills, and sharp questions that could tear apart the layers of a character. She came to explore the character's psychology, uncovering deep internal conflicts. There was no room for spontaneity. As for Costner, he walked in late, leisurely, holding a cup of coffee, as if he were attending a press conference, not a serious artists' meeting. He propped his feet up on a chair, looked around with a smug attitude, and said, "I believe in instinct. Overanalyzing will kill the emotion." Foster couldn't tolerate it. That line felt like a slap in the face to her. How could she be part of a project with someone who treated art as a joke? How could she collaborate with someone who didn't care about depth, about the intricate details, and only focused on temporary inspiration? What do you think of those who rely only on inspiration, never valuing research and preparation? Is it possible to create a masterpiece when participants only focus on appearances and never delve into the essence of the character? Could you accept working with someone who doesn't understand that art is a sacrifice, a passion, and hard work? Foster didn't want to say anything more. She stood up, without a word of explanation, without a glance toward Costner. She simply walked out of the room, closing the door behind her as if slamming shut any future collaboration opportunities. From then on, every project with Costner's name was ruthlessly rejected. Could you turn down every opportunity simply because you can't stand working with lazy people who lack respect for true art? Share your thoughts. I'd love to hear your story. Foster chose her own path. No compromise, no surrender. She couldn't allow art to be drained into shallow spontaneity. And she would never let someone like Costner destroy the values she had spent her life protecting. Foster was not one to give up easily, but when faced with Sean Penn, she knew she had reached her breaking point. Every ounce of her patience had been tested. Penn, with his arrogant and self-righteous attitude, was not just an actor, he was something worse. A person who turned every emotion, every effort, into a joke. And that was something she could no longer tolerate. Penn could never understand what Foster had dedicated her life to: dedication, sacrifice, and the belief that art is not a game. His ego was too large, too overwhelming, and there was no room for humility, no room for a shared effort to create a masterpiece. How could she work with someone like that? When every effort of yours is disregarded, when art in his eyes is just a joke for a self-absorbed person? Could you continue to stand beside someone whose every word oozes contempt for true art? When art becomes a display of ego, could you tolerate such a person as a colleague? Foster was no longer sitting still. She had no time for such baseless arrogance. She stood up, without a word, without a glance at Penn, and walked out of the room as if she didn't want to touch anything tainted by him. Any opportunity to collaborate with him had ended, without the need for further discussion. Have you ever had to walk away from an opportunity because you couldn't stand the shallowness, the unpreparedness, and the lack of true value? If you had to choose between the coolness of a fake ego and the sacrifice of true art, which would you choose? Foster knew well, art is not a game, and she would never allow herself to be dragged into such farce. Foster never believed that art was something meant for those seeking ease. To her, it was a battle, silent, relentless, but deeply meaningful. She gave up many things, turned down countless opportunities, all to protect one single thing, the truth in art. Have you ever had to turn down something huge, simply because accepting it would mean betraying yourself? Foster knew well, sincerity comes at a cost. Sometimes it's loneliness. Sometimes it's the cold stares of those who don't understand. But what would you choose, the easy way, or a path that refuses to compromise? Have you ever wondered if your sacrifices were worth it, when all around you are people taking shortcuts? Foster asked herself those same questions, and still kept walking, even when no one was waiting at the end of the road. Now, looking back, Jodie Foster doesn't need anyone to remind her of the awards or iconic roles. She doesn't measure success by the number of times she was praised, but by the number of times she had the courage to say no. Not to the world, but to the fear inside herself. Would you dare walk away from the spotlight, just to protect a small, flickering flame of truth in your heart? Foster dared. And because of that, she has no regrets. She doesn't need more fame, nor does she need to be understood. All she needs to know is this: every role she left behind, every time she chose silence, they are proof that art still belongs to those brave enough to live truthfully. And what about you? Do you still believe in art that can't be bought with money, that can't be sold through compromise? If the answer is yes, then Foster's story isn't an ending. It's a reminder that there are still people like you, like her, who dare to walk alone, dare to stand firm, and dare to believe that sincerity will never go out of style. Because the true ending doesn't come when the applause stops, but when you realize you never betrayed yourself.